Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. One of the more interesting side stories to watch or subplots of this season to watch play out is going to be Kevin Stefanski in Atlanta. Now, obviously, Kevin, being the former head coach of the Cleveland Browns, was always going to make whatever happens with him in Atlanta interesting for obvious reasons. But it's not just that Kevin is the coach in Atlanta and he used to be the coach in Cleveland. It is what Kevin is demonstrating, or at least trying to say, with what he's doing in Atlanta. See, Kevin Stefanski was fired in Cleveland, and I think justifiably so, because of a lack of offensive performance over the last 2 years that, even if you account for the roster not being good, just didn't seem like it reached the quality you would expect from somebody who has won 2 Coach of the Year awards, right? If we want to get into the more nitty-gritty details of why it is that the Kevin Stefanski offense felt like it just slowed down over time, and it's not really simply explainable by just saying, oh, well, the horses aren't that good. You know, there is stuff like the predictability of the Kevin Stefanski offense, right? That is the biggest thing that has happened, right? Kevin Stefanski's offenses have been very, very predictable. There are things that date back before things fell apart, right? The inability to get Odell Beckham utilized in the offense effectively while in Cleveland, even though Odell was in his athletic prime. The inability to have wide receivers who are consistently happy in Kevin's offense. Then you have, some of the stuff that popped up over the last few years. The quarterback play has been bad. The Browns have had quarterbacks who have been at the bottom of the league per 100 snaps in EPA per play for the last four quarterbacks in the last 2 years, right, have reached that level of bad with the Cleveland Browns under Kevin Stefanski. There are more things to kind of justify why it is that Kevin ultimately is no longer the head coach for the Cleveland Browns. But see, Kevin Stefanski is not operating as if his firing in Cleveland had any justification. He's actually operating towards the opposite. If he had more control in Cleveland, he feels he would have been more successful. Now, why is it that this feels like it's the case? Well, I'll talk to you about that after I talk about my Super Bowl picks this week for Sleepy. So it's Super Bowl week, and I think a fun thing to do with the Sleeper app would be to do at least 5 days of 5 different slips for picks on Sleeper. So every day you watch my channel, I'm going to be going over a different themed pick list that I have in for the Super Bowl. Sometimes you want to go against the grain. Sometimes you want to do what's popular. So what I decided to do today for the Hump Day slip is to use picks that are popular on the app right now. We'll see if consensus knowledge is better than what I know. So a $5 picks here for a $93 payout. Cooper Kupp over 3.5 receptions. Then you have Kenneth Walker with an anytime touchdown here. There's a pick on sale here with Sleeper with Ramondre Stevenson over 39.5 rushing yards. Then you have Drake May over 36.5 rushing yards. And then Travion Henderson over 18.5 rushing yards. So betting a lot on the Patriots' ability to run the ball against the Seattle Seahawks, and then also betting a lot on the Seahawks to be explosive versus the Patriots. So that's what Sleeper has out there. If you want to join the fun and make some picks for the Super Bowl, make sure you use my promo code WORSTTAKE. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use my promo code. Now, back to the video. Okay, so why is it that I'm convinced that Kevin doesn't think that that's the case? Well, just look at who Kevin has hired to come with him in Atlanta. Now, outside of the defensive coordinator spot, which ironically enough was a privilege that got taken away from him in Cleveland very early in his run. Remember, he had brought Joe Woods with him initially when he got the job. That ended up being such a disastrous hire that he was forced to fire his long-term friend in Joe Woods. And then the Browns organization hired Jim Schwartz. So that's kind of a different deal, right? But if you look at Kevin's situation at defensive coordinator in Atlanta, it's largely the same. The Falcons decided to retain Jeff Ulbrich, and Kevin is okay with that, right? So defensively, this got nothing to do with him. Same as in Cleveland, where he didn't really have much to do with the defense, reportedly. But offensively, if you look at his hire, it's a lot of names that you remember, right? He wanted to get Chad O'Shea, but Chad O'Shea jumped to Kansas City. He brought back he brought back Tommy Rees to be his offensive coordinator. His offensive coordinator in Cleveland, interestingly enough, after giving Tommy Rees play calling opportunities in Cleveland, he has taken those responsibilities back. If Bijan is to be believed, I think there was a mic'd up clip where Bijan says that Kevin's going to call the plays. Then there is Alex Van Pelt, who did not get brought back in his former capacity as offensive coordinator, but did get brought back at quarterbacks coach. Now, I thought that was double interesting, right? You're going to bring back Alex Van Pelt, but not necessarily bring back Alex Van Pelt to do the same job that he did in Cleveland. Maybe it's kind of we're trying to develop Tommy Rees to be a big-time head coach one day, so let's bring in Alex Van Pelt to be the quarterbacks coach to help Tommy Rees, which might make some sense here. Bill Musgrave was the quarterbacks coach out in Cleveland, who's a former, I think he was a former offensive coordinator at one point in his career. So that's kind of the same role that Bill Musgrave filled for Tommy Rees here in Cleveland. So, I mean, all this stuff says that Kevin's going with the familiar. Kevin's not really changing much of what he did in Cleveland. He expects to be significantly more successful just because the players that he has are better, which is to say that Kevin thought that, the roster was the problem in Cleveland and not necessarily him that's the problem. I think that's an interesting evaluation from Kevin. And look, I get why it is that Kevin can feel that way. I understand it. I don't think it's going to be hard. You're going to have to work hard to find people who understand why it is that Kevin feels that way, right? Because if you look at the roster that the Browns had offensively, it wasn't great. Yes, you had a former Pro Bowler in David Njoku, and Jerry Jeudy was a Pro Bowler the year prior. Who else was on that roster, right? The offensive line had been broken down and old, which Kevin did have something to do with, by the way. But the offensive line was old and broken down. That was Kevin's choice to stick with that offensive line, but it was old and broken down. He had good tight ends in Harold Fannin and David Njoku. He had one Pro Bowl wide receiver, and then a huge question mark at the quarterback position. If you look at the Falcons roster, the offensive line is much better than Cleveland has been. They have A-tier running back in Bijan, but in Cleveland he had Quincy Judkins, so it's not like he had a terrible running back in Cleveland last year. But Bijan, I think, is a significantly better prospect than Quincy, and that's just no disrespect to Quincy. It's just Bijan's just special in a way that most running backs aren't. So Bijan is there, and then they have Drake London. I do wonder, because Kevin has had issues with wide receivers, how successful Drake London will be. And then if you look at the type of wide receivers that Kevin likes, the more compact route runner type guys, that's not really Drake London's MO. So I wonder how Kevin tries to adjust his style. And we know that watching Kevin adjust his style has been kind of painful over the last few years. Maybe this is just another doubling down on Kevin Stefanski's style. Remember, 2025 was all about doubling down on what Kevin Stefanski does best. Getting back to the same offensive line principles, getting back to the same offensive principles, bringing back Joe Flacco, and getting back to the base Kevin Stefanski offense. That was the plan in 2025, and that plan ended with horrific results. You could argue worse results than they got the year prior, with Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator, and certainly a direction that Kevin Stefanski, with hindsight being 2020, was definitely nervous about. So if Kevin's plan in Atlanta is to double down again on the Kevin Stefanski style,
I think there's reason to believe that you should be a little cautious about that being successful if you are somebody who cares about the Atlanta Falcons. Ultimately, it's going to be fascinating to see for Browns fans exactly what goes down there, right? Some questions will be answered for the Cleveland Browns. Was the personnel that pathetic that just a upgrade in offensive line and the run game is going to make the Atlanta Falcons like all of a sudden a top tier team in the NFC? Or were there bigger underlying issues under Kevin Stefanski's style and his ability to adapt as an offensive mind, which most people by the end of his time in Cleveland were touting as why he needed to go? I don't know how this is going to play out. I'm skeptical of Kevin running it back in Atlanta because I am one of those people who believe that there were some more larger looming issues underneath the surface that created issues for Kevin Stefanski that ended up getting him at the end. And this direction that he's taking right now doesn't really seem like he's learned anything from the last couple of years. I also was of the opinion that it felt like Kevin Stefanski was checked out the last couple of years, that he just wasn't as engaged as he had been in previous years. And maybe that makes the difference for Kevin Stefanski, that him not having to deal with the Deshaun Watson contract anymore, him not having to deal with Shedeur Sanders fans calling him a racist on a daily basis, him not having to deal with all of the stuff that came with the job in Cleveland over the last couple of years, is able to rejuvenate him and make him more reminiscent of the guy who won those 2 Coach of the Year awards, who I acknowledge was a good coach, a damn good coach. We will see what happens with Kevin. One thing we do know is that a bunch of people are going to write their own narratives on this whole thing. So if you're wondering if we're going to get a definitive conclusion on this thing, probably not, right? People are going to write what they want to write. People are going to make the points they want to make, regardless of whether those points make sense in reality. I think all of this is fascinating going on in Atlanta. I really do, because I did not expect Kevin Stefanski to take another job and then immediately with his hires demonstrate that he didn't think that he was the problem in Cleveland. And maybe Kevin's right. Maybe Kevin wasn't the problem. And there's a lot of people in Cleveland who think that Kevin wasn't the problem, that the problem's Andrew Berry, or that it was Jimmy Haslam that forced him to fire Alex Van Pelt. And that's when it all broke down. I tend to have more questions to those theories, like, hey, how is Alex Van Pelt leaving your offense an excuse for your offense to go to shit? Just seems like a bad thing. Like, if Alex Van Pelt is that important that you can't have a good offense without him, shouldn't he be the head coach? That's another question that nobody ever asks when they say, oh, well, Alex Van Pelt leaving, was the problem for Kevin. But if Kevin can't survive not having Alex Van Pelt, was he really that good of a coach to begin with? I think that's a fair question to ask. There's a lot there that we want to know, and I think it's interesting that Kevin's got a job. And I think this is also a novel thing for Browns fans, because this is the first time in Cleveland Browns history we fired a coach and he got hired in the same cycle since coming back in 99. I don't know if this might have happened before, but this is definitely the first time since in recent history that the Browns have fired a coach and he got a head coach job the next cycle. So this is uncharted territory. We'll see how the Todd Monken experience goes for the Cleveland Browns. It could be possible that the Browns benefit greatly from getting Todd Monken, and the Falcons get better because Kevin's more rejuvenated, and maybe, the talent was that bad in Cleveland the last couple of years, right? Maybe the quarterback play was that bad. Maybe just getting a little bit better with Michael Penix was enough. It could be the case that we're both happy at the end of the year. It could be the case that we're both miserable at the end of the year. It's going to be fascinating to see. I'm not going to try to draw conclusions too early. And keep in mind, with a situation like this is just like Baker Mayfield, right? Where people are going to be super quick to pull the trigger on victory laps. Kevin Stefanski's going to have a bad game at some point in the season, and all the people who wanted Kevin fired are going to do their victory lap and be like, see, I told you he was ass. Kevin will have a couple of good performances as an offensive mind next year, and that for the people who want to defend Kevin, they're going to do the victory laps about Kevin Stefanski, and he's such a great offensive mind. I would at least give this thing a whole year before we make any real judgments that mean anything or any meaningful judgments. But we will see. This Kevin Stefanski thing is going to be the B plot to the Cleveland Browns season, right? What used to be filled by Baker Mayfield and whatever's going on with Baker is going to be now infused with Kevin Stefanski. It's almost like the NFC South exists solely to be the B plot to the Cleveland Browns season. But we'll see. I'm fascinated by the whole situation. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.